If you believe the marketing headed into the Olympics, we are winter. We play hockey, climb mountains, and of course, excel at winter sports. But is that the Canada you live in? Joining us now to discuss that question in Ottawa, Shima Khan, a columnist at the Globe and Mail and author of Hockey and Hijab, Reflections of a Canadian Muslim Woman. And with us here in our studio, Bruce Philp, branding consultant and author of Consumer Republic. Parminder Singh, former announcer with Hockey Night in Canada's Punjabi edition. Omer Aziz, writer, journalist, and contributor to the Globe and Mail, and David Roberts, professor in the Urban Studies program at the University of Toronto. Welcome to you all. Thanks for coming on the agenda.
Thanks.
So before we get underway with our conversation, I want to kick things off playing a collage of ads that we've seen on the air in recent months. Take a look at this.
Winter gives us everything and expects us to give it all back. We are Canada. We are winter.
Jonathan Toews' goal, assisted by the early rising parents, the backyard rink builders, the tireless fundraisers, the coaches and trainers, the pre-game meal makers, the kindly business sponsors, and everyone else whose efforts prove there's no such thing as an unassisted goal. We all play for Canada.
All right, those are just a few of the ads we're seeing on our television or have been in the past few months. There are numbers of them. These are just a couple we put together. We are going to talk about them, but I want to remind our viewers at home that you too can be part of this debate. Producer Meredith Martin and online editor Daniel Kitts are hosting a Twitter chat right now, so you can share your thoughts on tonight's topic and join in the conversation. On Twitter, use the hashtag AgendaTVO. Okay, so we've all seen the ads. I'm going to do a quick go around. Shima, let me begin with you. I want to ask each one of you, what was your first impression? Not after you had some time to think about. First impression when you see an ad like that?
Well, I liked all of them. I felt proud. I felt connected. And I really liked the ads.
Parminder, how'd you feel?
I mean, I'd have to agree with Shima. I think with me, the Clean Tire ad was the first one that I saw. I was like, you know what, this is actually cool, because put things into perspective, that there's more that goes into a hockey player than what we kind of see. And so I kind of liked that. I thought it was kind of an introspect into what hockey player and junior hockey is all about.
David?
For me, I'm an American. I've been living in Toronto for about 8 years now, so I think it's a reflection into Canadian culture. I didn't realize how much hockey was a rite of passage till 4 years ago during the Olympics. And that's, I think, so the ads really kind of helped me understand a bit more about what it means to be Canadian and how that gets broadcast back to us.
Bruce, I'm going to ask you about your personal reflections. You're a branding expert, and we'll talk to you about that coming in from that perspective. But personally, when you see an ad like that, what's sort of your first gut impression?
Really very much like those of your other guests. I thought they were terrific. I indulged myself in associating with those feelings and kind of being proud and the rare permission we get in Canada to be patriotic without seeming jingoistic about it.
So you felt patriotic watching those?
Kind of small p patriotic.
Small p, not big P.
Not big
no
P.
big P's.
No.
Okay, Omer?
I would agree with the other guests. I mean, I really felt patriotic, proud, I guess, of the ads. I think the winter one was really interesting because everyone knows Canada is really cold and it gets a lot of snow, and this was sort of, let's reclaim winter, let's make it, a part of our identity, and let's be proud about it. The hockey one was really interesting as well. I like the aspect of community, but I found that it was a little too, and here it comes, white, I found. I found that, like, as someone, I don't play hockey, I do watch it. I'm not watching the Olympics, as we talked about earlier, but I found that, there weren't as many visible minorities in that ad as I would have liked to have seen. But other than that, I like the aspect of community, of everyone coming together and all
Everyone's
that.
wondering when we were talking earlier, why aren't you watching the Olympics?
I'm not watching the Olympics because I don't like Vladimir Putin. I don't like what he's been doing, with respect to criminalizing homosexuality. And not just that, but like the Chechen war, the Syria stuff, journalists are going missing there. And it's just organized, corrupt mafia politics that I don't want to be endorsing.
So Bruce is a small p patriotic. You're a small p protest.
Well, I'm patriotic as well. I mean, I'm supporting the athletes, and I want us, Canada, to do well, and I've heard through the grapevine that we are doing really well. But with that said, I'm not going to support Putin.
Anyone else not watching the Olympics?
Yeah.
Bruce, you're not.
Yeah.
Why aren't you?
Well, largely the same reason. I think on these occasions I can kind of park my political views because you're supposed to, but the criminalization of homosexuality and all of the narrative that developed around that, it was just intolerable and really I think anti-Olympic.
Okay, I want to get back to something that Omer just said, that he said he didn't see himself in this commercial. I'm not a white guy, and it's not any shock to anyone here that 3 of the panelists tonight and the host are not white people. So Shima, when you said, it made you felt proud to watch those commercials, and yet you didn't see anyone who looks like you at all in those commercials. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, first, I don't know, maybe I'm colorblind, but I just saw Canadianness in all of these ads. The winter one, I mean, I grew up in Quebec, and Gilles Vigneault had that famous anthem, Mon pays, c'est pas mon pays, c'est l'hiver. So in Quebec, we've known that feeling for decades. And the Canadian Tire ad, I believe Mr. Taves grew up out west, and his story, I think, is a reflection of the community that he grew up in. If you were to do the same ad, let's say in 4 years with PK Subban, I would expect to see perhaps a different makeup. But I think that ad just reflects the reality of small communities, across the country. It's in the big metropolitan centers that you'll see more people of color, so to speak. So I didn't take any offense to it whatsoever. I just saw community support. I have a son who plays minor hockey, and I know what it's like as a parent, the fundraisers. So I really identified with it.
Parminder, let me ask you. You were I believe, the first Canadian commentator of Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi. Is that right? Okay.
That's right.
So you're a guy who's interested in hockey. Did you play hockey?
No, I did, but I didn't play organized hockey.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't see yourself in those commercials either.
I don't. And I mean, I've been to the community rinks. I've, in Toronto I have, and I see the people that I grew up with playing shinny hockey, going skating, and I grew up in a very mixed racial community. From the Jane and Finch area, I was skating with Jamaicans. My friends were Vietnamese and Korean, and those are the kind of individuals that I saw. Now, and I agree with Shima that if Canadian Tire was trying to do a reflective on Jonathan Toews, then I understand where they're coming from. But if they're trying to grow the sport and if they're trying to increase sales, as a company would, then I think they could have done a better job with the ad, because it doesn't make me feel, or that say my kids, that I'd want them to play hockey. There isn't anybody they could relate to in that ad. But as a hockey commentator, as a person who's played hockey and been to these arenas, yeah, I can totally relate. I see the volunteers there. I see the local community getting involved in the businesses. So in that sense, I liked the commercial. I actually felt really good about it, that, hockey is more than what you kind of see with that single player. But is it reflective? If that's what Canadian Tire was going for, then probably not.
Okay, Bruce, put on your professional hat, because Parminder just, talked about maybe the ideas that they're trying to grow sales, and if they are, then they should include, a more diverse representation of Canadian. Right. Put on your branding hat. I mean, what are they trying to do in this ad, in these kinds of ads?
Well, I think they're trying to evoke the feelings that we all described at the beginning of this. Yeah,
they got us.
And exactly, they have. I feel strongly that marketers have no moral duty to ram ideology down our throats, but they do have a moral duty to reflect the society they're trying to sell to. So my inclination would be to look again carefully at that advertising and see whether, in fact, that reflection is happening. We all just let it wash over us and reacted. Marketers tend not to do things that don't work for long. So we have to conclude that there's more right than wrong going on in that stuff, and evaluate it accordingly.
The point was made though, that maybe this is appealing to more white Canada, not in the big urban centers like Toronto, Montreal. But I mean, we can keep going. Calgary, Vancouver, Edmonton, Halifax. I mean, these aren't major centers, all of them, but they are at least growing in their diversity. And again, from a branding perspective, would you take that into consideration, or is it that traditionally it's been a white sport, or snow sports are are considered white, if I can call
You
it.
know, I'd be shocked if anyone sat around a boardroom table during the creation of those ads and says, we got to make sure we have a lot of white people. If the society that we live in wasn't accurately reflected in those ads, that was probably no more than negligence. But again, I'm not sure that that's the case.
So not deliberate.
Yeah.
We're not deliberately excluding
I don't
anyone.
think so, and maybe that's not to our credit either. I mean, working with clients in the United States, it's quite common to have a client say that the cast of the commercial must reflect the society in terms of ethnicity and gender. That's a common, explicit requirement. You don't see that as often in Canada. So we may just take it all for granted, and that produces the occasional misstep. But
Does multiculturalism, celebrating our diversity, does it sell product?
I think that varies a lot by the product. You can attach a social agenda to a brand to the extent that the product it represents has a social meaning, and that varies, and so therefore does the relevance of that kind of issue.
David, weigh in here. You studied urban studies.
Yeah.
How much responsibility should companies and marketers have in representing the society in which they're trying to sell their goods to?
Well, I'm with Bruce. I mean, I think there's no moral kind of responsibility. These companies are trying to sell their goods, and they're working within that system. So there isn't that sort of capacity of, you must do this. Like, there isn't a requirement. But I think that there is, both in terms of the capitalist aspect of it, if you want to sell your goods to a wider audience, it behooves you to include PK Subban's story in your hockey commentary, right? Like, it's quite easy. He's there. He's an Olympian. Like, why not include him? It seems like a very easy thing that they could have done.
But if you did include someone like a PK Subban or a Kadri or a Jerome McGinley, you could be seen as sort of, playing tokenism. Like, let's just throw in the black guy or the Muslim guy or the Indian guy or the Indian whatever, Indian girl. Because so we look diverse when really these are sports that aren't diverse.
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably the more truth behind it, right? That these sports are expensive, so they reflect not only just a particular racial group, but also particular ability to spend on a recreational activity, right? So this call for us to play hockey is really only heard by a small portion of that population, and with the correlation between wealth and race in North America, it's not that surprising that white people are the predominant players of hockey throughout Canada.
We are going to talk specifically about hockey in just a minute, but Omar, you want to hop in here.
Yes, well, I just want to say I wasn't offended by the ads. That's not the feeling that I had, but I think that, look, as a reflection of hockey, it's perfectly reflective. You can put on an NHL game and you see that most of the people are white. But I think if you're going to wrap yourself around the flag, then I think you have a duty. I wouldn't call it a moral duty, but I think you do have some sort of duty to be reflective of the ethnocultural diversity of this country, where, in the next 5 years, 1/5 of the country is going to be, visible ethnic minorities. And, when you're putting this sort of image of the country out there for the world to see, I think that you should be reflecting the diversity of the country in its totality.
Because I guess the argument is, these commercials are not selling hockey. They're trying to get us to join the Olympic spirit, to feel our nationality. They're not trying to get us to fill seats at the Air Canada centers. So by just focusing, on that sort of white demographic, are they missing something here, Bruce?
Well, I think so, because inclusiveness is discussed in this kind of context as being inherently an ethical imperative, and we sort of stop there. We don't tend to think enough about what inclusiveness might mean. We don't tend to think enough about how someone of color successfully playing professional hockey is a story about overcoming adversity, and that's inherently Canadian, or some other kind of heroism that attaches to those things. I think that we don't show enough imagination about that stuff sometimes, but we have to bear in mind, marketing does tend to play to the lowest common denominator because that's where everybody is, that's where the money is. And when Statistics Canada asked us in the last census to identify our ethnic origins, fully a third of Canadians essentially declined to answer the question and said Canadian. So that says to me that on some level, we'd rather not focus on what makes us different.
Okay, Shima, I have to be honest. When I first saw these ads, I didn't even notice that there were no people of color in them. And then our producer, Meredith Martin, wrote this blog saying, hey, is that okay? Is this the Canada that we live in? And I thought, hey, she's right. So upon second reflection, do you think that you should have been reflected in ads like this?
To be honest, no. Like I said, I didn't feel that way at all. I spoke to Meredith about that. I just see Canadian character in those commercials, community support, volunteerism, a bit of self-effacement. And to me, there's no color behind that. There's no particular race or color or ethnicity. I'll tell you one thing. I mean, we're talking about diversity and multiculturalism. One of the things that I think we should be more cognizant of and more critical of is the fact that we have almost zero representation of Aboriginal communities in our marketing. And I think this, as a Canadian, I just feel that this is a community that we must be paying much more attention to than official multiculturalism. So if there's a beef, that it's with that particular aspect, the lack of any representation or recognition of our Aboriginal communities.
Okay. Parminder, you're watching the Olympics, yes?
Right.
Okay. You have some Punjabi friends, some other Indian friends. I mean, is anyone raising the issue that, hey, we don't see ourselves out there on the ski hills, or we don't see ourselves in these ads, we aren't sort of reflected in the Canada that we're all supposed to be very involved in, at least for these few weeks of the Olympics?
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the question does strike that, when you look at Canadian athletes, that is, it's really, truly reflective of, Canadian population. But when we look at winter sports itself, I mean, they're very expensive to get into. And I was watching an interview with Ron McLean just a couple of days ago, and the pair that one won the gold and the other one won bronze, the Canadians, and one of the skiers actually had her parents there, and they were discussing how when she was young we put her into lessons, and we wanted to get her into figure skating, and she has 6 different coaches, and they all agreed that, or the skier felt she wasn't passionate about it. And I'm there thinking that, hey, I couldn't afford my first pair of skates until I was 14. If it wasn't for Toronto District School Board going through the elementary system of their loaner skate program, when I was in grade 2 or grade 3, that I probably wouldn't have gone skating. And there was a loaner system. I went and I tried on skates, and I was skating because of that. So, it is a question, but and I think it's kind of becoming something of the elite.
Well, my husband, who's Caucasian, I can't skate, I don't ski, I can barely toboggan. And he always said, didn't you grow up in Canada? I said, yeah, born and raised, except for I was born and raised by parents who were immigrants from India, who didn't skate, who didn't, were scared of ice because they'd never seen it before they moved to this country. So it isn't just an economics argument, it's also a heritage argument, is it not, David?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. I think that if your parents or your grandparents, you grew up playing hockey and skiing, then you make a way to make it happen, right? And even if it does cost quite a bit of money, you figure out ways to do that. So it does have an appeal, and you see that reflected in the countries that participate in the Winter Games. It's a much different set of countries than the much more wide expanse of countries that participate in the World Cup or the Summer Olympics.
Okay, I want to talk about hockey because in 2 of those 3 commercials, it's a focal point, and on many others that we're seeing on our televisions right now. Hockey probably, perhaps arguably, the most recognizable symbol of Canada. Do we all see hockey as the unofficial national symbol of Canada? Bruce, do you?
Yeah, I think we do. It's the one thing we can kind of agree on. It's the one thing that sort of sets us apart.
We can't agree on hockey at all. We all have our different teams that we cheer for.
We certainly can't agree on who's hockey, but certainly the fact of hockey we can agree on. But I think a powerful consensus has emerged around that sort of supersedes any logic. We've just decided that's our symbol, and we're gonna honor that.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, we just one day woke up and said, "Hey, hockey's it." I mean, this is a conscientious effort by companies and stuff to sort of use our unofficial national symbol, is it not?
Sure, of course, because it works, because it's going to touch the most hearts.
Okay, why does it work? Why does hockey work so well?
Well, because I think there's probably a couple of things at work here. One is that an interest in sport, either as a participant or a spectator, tends to be driven by a quest for community. And if that community is synthetic, fine, so be it. It still meets most of our needs. So we all have that. And Canada, being a country full of people who are, pretty, in a sense, individualistic, dines on community carefully and deliberately. And hockey's just what we've decided is going to do the job. And the other is, frankly, it's been mythologized brilliantly, really since before we were in any conscious way a multicultural nation. So a lot of the people who populate this country now and their parents, arrived in a country where this was already symbolically powerful stuff. And so it was a shibboleth. It was not something that was debated. It's just what we have decided is going to be the locus of our national pride.
Okay, Omer, I say Canada, you say?
Hockey.
Okay.
Everyone does it, and there's a positive reinforcement cycle as well. I mean, it has been mythologized, and young kids grow up playing hockey, and they end up going to the Olympics and winning gold, and then the country is really proud. I mean, the Prime Minister of the country wrote a book on hockey while in office. Like it doesn't get more, it doesn't get more sort of national myth than that. But I do think that it's something that I have no friends that play ice hockey. Right, none of them.
And you don't yourself?
We played every sport, including street hockey, but ice hockey was too expensive. And my parents were sort of like, that Russell Peters skit where we're going to become Canadian overnight. My parents became Canadian overnight, and we couldn't do ice hockey because it was too expensive with the uniform and the skates and everything. And I think that's the case for a lot of kids, especially minorities who take to basketball or football or baseball or other sports that are a little bit easier on the bank account.
Shima, I say Canada, you say?
Hockey. Hockey. I mean, I'm giving my age away, but I remember in 1971, I was living in Montreal as a kid, and this was during the FLQ crisis. Very traumatizing time in Montreal and the province. And that was the year the Canadians won this miracle Stanley Cup. And it just brought the whole city, the whole province together. 1 year later, 1972, the first Canada-USSR series. I remember cheering with my classmates. Everyone took the day off for that final Game 8. I mean, the whole country was cheering. And so I've seen it bring people together. In Montreal, I grew up, during the heydays of the 70s, going to Stanley Cup parades. It didn't matter if you were a sovereigntist, a federalist, French, English, pure land, immigrant. We all came together around hockey. And I've just seen it as such a unifying force for the good, for the better.
You have kids, right?
I do, 3.
Do they play hockey?
My son does. My girls like soccer instead.
Okay. David, same question to you. I say Canada, you say?
Hockey, for sure.
As the American, you still say hockey.
I mean, I didn't watch hockey growing up at all. Like, I didn't know what it was. Americans can't follow pucks. It's getting better now with high-def TV, but when I came here, my friends would watch, and I would have no idea what was going on. It was only really in the last Olympics, and especially, the gold medal match against the U.S., where I really started gaining an interest in hockey at all. And now I'm unfortunately a Leafs fan. So it's become part of my community and becoming, I guess, more comfortable with living in Canada.
And I'm curious because you're sort of the insider, but the outsider. I mean, were you sort of baffled by our attachment to hockey when you came?
I don't think so. I mean, growing up in Seattle, we had our attachment to baseball and
You were
football.
Almost Canadian living in Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, but we still don't watch hockey there at all. But we still have our attachment to sports. And when the Mariners are good or when the Seahawks are great, you get community really coming together. You just had 750,000 people show up for the Super Bowl parade, right? That sort of sports are really the only thing that brings people out in those numbers and connects different groups that may never interact with each other. So it's not that surprising.
Parminder, Shima got all nostalgic talking about her childhood, remembering all these great hockey moments. Yeah. As a former hockey commentator, a guy who's sort of seen how Canadians react, what is it about this sport? Because as David points out, I mean, sports generally are this unifying force, but hockey in Canada seems to work unlike any other sport in this country.
Well, it's something we're good at, and it's where we're winning. And as much as we'd like to enjoy other sports and have other pastime, but hockey is the one thing that we can kind of cheer about, and especially when it comes to the international level. I know even with NHL, we may have our home teams that struggle or so forth. So but when it comes to the Olympics, and if we're talking patriotism, and at Canada, we're always bashed that we don't have enough. We're not patriotic enough, but I think hockey is the one thing that does kind of unite us. I remember growing up that, new immigrant to Canada, really wanted to connect with other classmates and students. And then, I was almost thrown into this conversation about hockey. And that's when I started watching and said, hey, you know what? Let me pick up on some of these stats so I can be the cool kid in the class, that who knows his hockey. And that's one thing that kind of, I believe that we built a union around hockey.
It's funny. The point's been made a couple of times that it's the most thunderingly obvious answer to your question, which is we win at this.
Right.
Most of the things we do globally that are kind of awesome are sort of hard to understand, or they're nice and noble. But we rarely send large groups of men wearing the same clothes into another country and crush them, unless they're carrying hockey sticks. We do that, actually.
Okay, we win at speed skating a lot too.
It's somehow it's not quite the same thing. Individual sports, as awesome as they are, they just don't tend to fire up community the way that team sports do, I think.
Okay, so that's why hockey works. Let me throw this one at you. What other symbols does Canada get associated with in the branding world?
Well, I think the reference was made earlier to that wonderful line, Mon pays c'est l'hiver. I think all that stuff attaches to us, and so it's the landscape, it's the things you do in snow, it's the wildness and emptiness of the place. These are the things that define us around the world, and then metaphorically, those things tend to speak to innocence and a work ethic and a sense of optimism and individual. I think that's our brand globally.
Interesting you say that these are the things that define us around the world, because diversity is one of the things that also defines us around the world. And yet, the two kind of seem to be, in contradiction to it. We celebrate our diversity here. People know Canada for our diversity. Yet when we're selling our country or celebrating our country to ourselves and to the world, we don't tend to do this.
So I think there's some good reasons for that. I would actually defend that, although I realize I may make myself a target in doing so. And the reasons are this: that first of all, diversity in and of itself tends to attach to urban life, and it's a claim every great city in the world would make. So it isn't differentiating. It may be wonderful, but it isn't differentiating. And the second thing is the fact that we are multicultural is not nearly so interesting to our story nationally, as the reason people came. That's what makes the country interesting. And that's not a recent phenomenon. The choice to come to Canada says certain things about what you want from life, what you believe in, and the work you're willing to put into achieving those things. And that goes all the way back to the first immigrants, I think. That's interesting. That's worth attaching to a brand. The fact that we have accomplished multiculturalism, if in fact we have, is more for us to enjoy internally than it is a branding opportunity.
Or is that how you see it?
No, I don't. I can't think of any other country in the world that just wraps its flag around only one sport. I mean, even European, they're crazy about football, crazy about soccer, and yet they have other national histories and myths that everyone can sort of attach themselves to, a civic form of nationalism, not just an athletic form of nationalism. And I was in the Middle East recently, for example, and over there, the farther away you get from Europe and North America, the less people know about ice hockey, right? So in these parts of the world, in Asia, for example, you tell someone you're Canadian, and it always elicits a positive feeling. Now, they might not know about our contributions to the UN or about the fact that we're first country in the world to legislate multiculturalism, but they do get the sense that your country is a good presence in the world, and I think that's something that could bind all of us together. For example, much more than a single sport could.
No,
I'd
agree with you in the sense that our perspective on what Canada is about and the international perspective, I don't think they're the same. Because for us, we're Canadian, the true north. It's cold here. That may be the same though, because I think everybody does feel Canada is cold, and this winter hasn't really helped, in subsiding that. But when it does come to the international perspective, and I think Canadians are kind of seen as just a friendly people, and you're absolutely right, and I would agree with you that I don't think hockey stands out, above our inclusiveness of Canada.
David, when you look at this stuff with your professorial hat on, and Bruce says diversity is kind of we don't focus on it in terms of branding. I mean, what does that say about who we are as Canadians?
Well, I think in part it's because diversity just sort of happened, right? There was changes in the immigration policies in the 1960s to allow for diversity to happen and to create a system where you came here because you had certain qualifications, right? So, and that allowed a different sort of ability for diversity to happen than, say, the targeting of particular nationalities that was historically the way that Canada approached immigration. And so I don't know that Canada's ever really had that conversation about what it means to actually be multicultural besides the visibility of multiculturalism, right? We know what the symbols are, we see the festivals, we see the celebration, we can, like the fact that there is a multicultural faces of a city, but what it actually means, how we live together, the types of challenges that creates, and the types of respect that requires. I'm not sure we've ever really gotten into that conversation fully, because I think we just accept it as a part of life in our.
So as an immigrant from the United States, which is a country that largely focuses often on divisions amongst people based on race and ethnicity, you move to Canada and you see this sort of multicultural blanket, and you see a bunch of visible minorities saying, I don't mind if I'm not reflected in those commercials. No big deal. It doesn't make me feel any less Canadian.
Right.
What does that say to you?
Well, I think in the U.S., there's been an ongoing struggle, both politically and on the ground, over what it means to be an American, right? And for a long period of time, that struggle was delineated by race. So segregation, civil rights movement, all of those things were about, looking at the way that what it means to be American was too narrowly defined, right? And so that struggle exists. In Canada, because of the much shorter history of being diverse, except for with the case of Aboriginal people, which is a whole different story and something that we can get into later. That diversity it's not about the struggle to claim space. It's not about the struggle in the same way, I don't think. And so I think what I've seen is that Canadians tend to have conversations about multiculturalism on a much more superficial level than what has been the case of growing up in the U.S.
Growing up with parents and family members who came in the 70s, right? That what they kind of faced back then, and I think the immigrant community does speak a lot about Pierre Trudeau and the Canadian Charter of Rights, because I think they did struggle a lot, and for inclusiveness and to fit in, and until it was legislated, until the Canadian Charter of Rights was formalized, that a lot of individuals that I spoke with who grew up in that area felt that until we had that backing from the government, that we didn't truly feel Canadian. Right, and mind you, a majority of them were immigrants here, and then they got their citizenships and so forth. So I think Canada as a country, from what it's built on to the next generation now, that we may take multiculturalism for granted, but the path, the route that it has taken was a very rough path for those who went through it, right? And if we start looking at some of these commercials in that greater extent, like if the world is watching this, then I'd like to see some diversity in something that does represent Canada.
Okay, I want to ask one more hockey question. So cricket and soccer really soaring in terms of popularity across Canada, in terms of enrollment at very junior levels and building cricket pitches in urban centres. Hockey, not so much. Is there a danger of us tying our unofficial identity to hockey if hockey is not as important as it was at one time, Bruce?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know whether that will ever happen, but we have to remember that participation isn't the only condition necessary for hockey to be central to our mythology. We can just like watching it, and we can just like the idea of it. Even religions only require of us that we appear at church once a week in most cases, not obviously all cases, but my probably ill-considered metaphor is essentially that it doesn't have to be present in our lives every minute for it to have social meaning. And I think we're a long way from that.
Shima, what do you think? Is there a danger in tying our national identity so closely to one symbol?
I think there is. I think we're more than just hockey. It's interesting, the American view of hockey. Hockey is as popular as wrestling, and apparently has as much authenticity in the views of your average American as wrestling. So I think. We take our game very seriously, others don't, which is okay, but we're more than that. And just to go back to your previous discussion, one of the things we don't talk about as Canadians, I think we're still trying to figure out who we are, because we are hopefully going beyond the stage where we define ourselves by not being American. I think that's formed quite a bit of the way we define ourselves by who we're not. And the time has come and is ripe for defining ourselves who we are, and the positive qualities and the symbols and the historical struggles about our nation, rather than looking, across the border.
Why do we do that? Why do we as Canadians do that? It's tend to define ourselves by who we are not rather than who we are, as Seema suggests we should. Parminder, why do you think that is?
You know what? I think it's just my perspective on this, kind of defending this huge, great American patriotism that we do see. But I think one thing as Canadians that we've done well is recognizing our differences and our different practices and celebrations and kind of embracing that. But I do agree that there may be this whole we are not American, we are Canadian. But at the same time, when we do say we are Canadian, I know I'm changing the subject here a little bit, but that we also celebrate our similarities, and don't just put ourselves in little boxes that okay, you are the cricket folks or you are so and so, right? That, and I think that's where even with hockey that everyone appreciates it or whatever it is, that it's something where we can come together and celebrate our similarities rather than our differences. That is probably the new route that I think Canada may want to take on.
I think the defining ourselves by what we're not thing is a bit of a trope maybe that we've inherited because of the overbearing American popular culture that we're exposed to. But when you scratch it, I do work in both countries and lots of consumer research and polling stuff, and the thing that keeps coming back to me over and over again is when you hear people talk, the real difference is that Americans are concerned with collectiveness and we are concerned with the individual. That's the real difference. The idea that that Robin Williams promotes, that America's a great party and Canada's the people in the mezzanine looking down at it because they didn't get invited, I think is great fun, and we enjoy poking that fun at ourselves sometimes too. But I think the truth of it is we actually understand very well how we're different and what makes us.
What's interesting in these Olympics, which you were not watching, but I'm sure you have heard, is that the Canadian athletes and the team and Canada in general are sort of walking around with this swagger is the word that keeps coming up, that we're not kind of saying it would be just good to show up and we'll all try our best and wow, isn't it just a great honor to be on the world stage at this elite level competition. We're, our athletes and others are now saying we are here to win, right, and we can win, and we are here to be number one, which is, people are saying that is a different style for us Canadian. Anyone see that?
Well, I mean, I think in a sense, you were talking about tying your nationalism to one sport, and I think we're swaggering right now. But 2 years later, when the Summer Olympics are coming around, we're going to be self-effacing and probably watching something else. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Seema.
Can I jump in here? Yeah, there's nothing wrong. I mean, I lived and studied in the States for 7 years. I was fortunate enough to be at Harvard and MIT, and I came back. And one of the things I realized is, look, as a Canadian, I am just as good as anyone else anywhere in the world. And I don't think that's a matter of swagger. That's just a matter of being confident with your abilities and with excellence and with striving to be the best. And that's what I see in these Olympics. 2 years ago in the Summer Olympics, our Canadian women's national team, a huge source of pride. They inspired a whole nation. And so I think as Canadians, to be confident in who we are and that we can be number one in the world, why not? It's not a matter of swagger. It's just, let's just roll up our sleeves and do it, do the job.
It's a quiet confidence, though. It's not an overbearing confidence, I think, the way Americans are perceived of being. At least that's the sense I've had.
And I think that, if we are looking for someone to blame, then I think it's the marketers, it's because it all started from the I am Canadian. I would say that, I think that's where we kind of started thinking, oh, you know what, we are Canadian. And mind you, there were, ads I recall on television where we had Joe Carter hitting that home run, with Toronto beating the Blue Jays beating the Atlanta Braves, and that's something that was always projected on television. Even though Joe Carter's American, but somehow I'm still Canadian, right? And it's
just for people who might not remember the I Am Canadian ad. It was an ad for Molson's. An actor named Jeff Douglas, actually the host of As It Happens, now stood up and said, "I am Canadian." It was I remember the conversation, Bruce. Talk to me about this as a branding guy. I mean, it was the first kind of proudly Canadian, confident ad that everyone talked about.
It's certainly become part of the canon that way. I think people overestimate the positive commercial effects of that piece of advertising. It was an evolution of a campaign that prior to that point had just said, "I am." And the brand Canadian was underneath it, and it was sort of more of an existential yelp that young men might make to assert themselves in the world, and it was a lovely idea. And then someone said, "I am Canadian," and decided to create 60 seconds worth of every cliche about how we feel about Americans. It didn't run for very long. People talked about it a lot, but I don't think it reflected us, and I think the market said so.
Okay, we only got a couple of minutes left. Let's all make a commercial. If you were to make a commercial that reflected your Canada, what's in it? Shima, kick us off here.
I would begin with Terry Fox. I know that we've been talking about hockey, but in reflection, when I think of one person, especially in our recent memory, I think he epitomizes so many of the qualities that make me feel proud as to who we are as a nation. I would begin with his symbol, with his efforts, with his struggle, and just extend it to other aspects of our society. And I know marketers don't like to dwell on the negative, but we've got struggles ahead to heal with our Aboriginal communities.
Okay, Omer.
I really like the Coca-Cola Super Bowl ad. So I would do something like that, where you'd have all the Canadians singing "O Canada" in a variety of different languages, English and French, as well as all the other languages that make up this country. And I think that would be really reflective of the country, and it would show some confidence, I think.
Interesting that you talk about O Canada. We're going to be talking about our anthem in a minute. But Parminder, make your commercial. Brand Canada.
I think it's got to be Mosaic. That's who we're not the melting pot of the U.S. We are, different, and I think that's something that we have embraced. And but it's Canadian values. I think that's something that as was mentioned earlier, that we all immigrated here to Canada, and we all embrace these great Canadian values. And I think that's one thing that needs to be displayed on anything that's Canada.
Yeah, and I think that's where I struggle with the Taves ad, right? I think that starts to do that, but it does it in a way that isn't reflective. So perhaps going to these community hockey rinks that Parminder talked about, where you see the community actually affected, maybe not playing professional hockey, but playing shimmy, and really showing that sort of diversity and all the background that goes into making those places actually work.
Okay, Bruce, you get paid to do this stuff as a branding consultant.
And so it's most unfortunate that I have to agree with the commercial that your other guest just wrote. I don't see why we have to abandon our mythology in order to claim our our nationhood as it exists today. So I would situate the commercial at 6 a.m. in some small community rink full of rink rats and exhausted parents with steaming cups of coffee. Except that I would use that canvas, which is familiar to us, in which we trust and we react to emotionally. I would use that canvas to paint the country as it is today.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Great conversation. Shima, thanks for joining us from Ottawa, and the rest of you around the table here today. Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.